Welcome back to our channel for another deep dive into the dramatic world of the bold and the beautiful. Today is a beautiful day to explore the intense emotional landscapes of our favorite characters. We have a truly heartbreaking and game-changing storyline to unpack today, so settle in as we break down every shocking twist and turn. The agonizing crescendo of the ongoing corporate and personal wars in Los Angeles has finally reached a devastating, irreversible breaking point. For weeks, the bitter feud between Forrester Creations and the newly formed Logan Fashion House has been tearing families apart, but no one has borne the brunt of this toxic crossfire quite like Will Spencer. Caught between his unwavering loyalty to his family's ruthless business maneuvers and his desperate, all-consuming love for Elektra Forrester, Will found himself backed into an impossible emotional corner. The crushing weight of the secrets he was forced to keep, combined with the explosive violence that erupted at the bikini bar when he accidentally struck family patriarch Eric Forrester, set the stage for a tragedy of epic proportions. When Elektra delivered her final, brutal rejection, viewing his actions as an unforgivable betrayal and an indicator of a dangerous, unhinged nature, the fragile foundation of Will's entire existence shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Blinded by the intoxicating and lethal cocktail of high-proof alcohol and profound, suffocating heartbreak, a devastated Will Spencer stumbled out into the unforgiving darkness of the Los Angeles night. The rejection from Elektra echoed in his mind like a relentless drumbeat, a cruel reminder of every mistake, every lie, and every violent outburst that had led him to this desolate moment. Seeking a desperate escape from the agonizing pain that threatened to consume him whole, Will straddled his heavy motorcycle. He did not care about the risks. He did not care about the consequences. He only wanted the roaring engine to drown out the sound of his own breaking heart. As he tore down the winding, treacherous stretches of the Pacific Coast Highway, the cool ocean breeze did absolutely nothing to sober the chaotic, destructive storm raging within his mind. He pushed the machine faster and faster, blurring the streetlights into a continuous streak of meaningless color, daring the universe to intervene in his misery. The universe answered with catastrophic cruelty. In a horrifying symphony of screeching tires, twisting metal, and shattering glass, Will lost control of the motorcycle on a sharp, unforgiving curve. The heavy machine skidded violently, launching him into the air before crushing him against the unforgiving concrete barrier. The impact was visceral and devastating, echoing through the silent night like a bomb detonating. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but the eerie silence of the aftermath, broken only by the hiss of the smoking engine and the shallow, ragged breaths of a young man whose life had just been violently, permanently altered. The physical trauma inflicted upon his body was immense, but it was the catastrophic damage to his lower extremities that would ultimately define the rest of his life. Sirens soon pierced the night sky, their wailing urgency signaling the beginning of a desperate fight for survival. Paramedics rushed the broken and bleeding Spencer Ayer into the chaotic environment of the emergency room, where the sterile scent of antiseptic mingled with the metallic tang of blood. The trauma center erupted into a frenzy of calculated medical intervention. Dr. Lee Finnegan, a brilliant and pragmatic surgeon accustomed to the brutal realities of emergency medicine, took immediate charge of the catastrophic situation. As she assessed the extent of Will's injuries, her experienced eyes quickly zeroed in on the most critical threat to his survival. The trauma to his left leg was beyond anything that could be surgically repaired. The bones were completely shattered. The muscle tissue was irreparably destroyed, and the compromised femoral artery was causing a massive, life-threatening hemorrhage. With the cold, hard logic that her profession demanded, Dr. Lee Finnegan realized that there was only one path forward. It was an agonizing medical decision, one that carried the weight of a young man's entire future, but it was the only way to ensure that he actually had a future at all. To save Will Spencer's life, she had to amputate his left leg. The surgery was brutal, swift, and entirely irreversible. As Lee operated, meticulously working to stop the bleeding and close the catastrophic wound, she carried the heavy burden of knowing that when Will woke up, he would be waking up to a nightmare from which he could never escape. The physical mutilation was necessary for survival, but the psychological scars it would leave behind would be unfathomable. News of the horrific accident spread through the interconnected families of Los Angeles like wildfire, leaving a trail of shock and devastation in its wake. Electra Forrester arrived at the emergency room like a ghost, her face drained of all color, her trembling hands clutching the cold fabric of her coat. The blinding fluorescent lights of the hospital corridors seemed to mock the absolute darkness that had suddenly enveloped her soul. When Dr. Lee Finnegan emerged from the surgical theater, her scrubs stained and her expression grim, the air in the waiting room seemed to instantly evaporate. Lee delivered the devastating news with a professional yet heavy heart, explaining the severity of the crash and the unavoidable necessity of the amputation. The words hit Electra like a physical blow, sending her collapsing to the sterile hospital floor in a heap of agonizing regret and unfiltered despair. The realization of what had happened to the man she loved, the man she had just ruthlessly discarded, shattered her completely. A profound, suffocating wave of self-blame washed over her. She was suddenly haunted by the terrifying conviction that her rigid, uncompromising stance had been the catalyst for this tragedy. If she had only listened to his pleas, if she had only possessed the capacity to forgive his flaws, if she had not been so blindly loyal to the Forrester family's elitist demands, what would never have been on that motorcycle? She believed with every fiber of her being that her harsh rejection had pushed him directly into the path of death, and the fact that he had survived only to be permanently mutilated felt like a punishment far worse than grief. As Electra wept uncontrollably in the hallway, drowning in a toxic sea of guilt and sorrow, a starkly different scene was unfolding inside the intensive care unit. Melissa Dillon, the calculated and opportunistic assistant who had been meticulously maneuvering herself into Will's life, had already claimed her position. While Electra was paralyzed by her own self-reproach, Dillon had seamlessly transitioned into the role of the devoted, unwavering caretaker. She sat closely by Will's bedside, her hand gently holding his, her presence a quiet but powerful testament to her strategic patience. Dillon had waited in the wings, enduring Electra's insults and navigating the complex corporate politics, all for a moment just like this. In Will's most vulnerable, broken state, Dillon was the one who was there, offering the unconditional acceptance that Electra had so rigidly withheld. When Electra finally gathered the fragile remnants of her strength to approach the ICU, the sight that greeted her through the glass observation window was a psychological death blow. She saw Will, pale and unconscious, hooked up to a myriad of life-saving machines, the reality of his missing limb hidden beneath the stark, white hospital blankets. But more devastatingly, she saw Melissa Dillon sitting faithfully by his side, gently stroking his hair. In that singular, heartbreaking moment, Electra experienced a crushing epiphany. She realized with absolute, terrifying clarity that she had not only broken Will physically through her rejection, but she had also lost him forever. The love war that had raged between them, filled with passionate highs and bitter lows, had ended in a tragic defeat. Dillon had won, not through corporate maneuvering or family legacy, but by simply being the one who stayed when the darkness descended. The realization that she had handed the love of her life over to a woman she despised was a bitter pill that Electra would have to swallow for the rest of her days. However, the tragedy of Will's accident did not merely serve to resolve a complicated romantic triangle. It also acted as a highly combustible accelerant for the ongoing, vicious feud between the Logan sisters. Katie Logan Spencer arrived at the hospital in a state of frantic, maternal terror. When she learned the extent of her son's injuries, that her vibrant, strong boy had been permanently dismembered, a fierce, protective rage ignited within her. Katie was utterly shattered, her heart breaking into pieces as she contemplated the agonizing road to recovery that lay ahead for Will. But that sorrow quickly morphed into a desperate need to assign blame, to find a target for the overwhelming injustice of the situation. When Brooke Logan Forrester arrived at the hospital, allegedly to offer her support, the tension in the waiting room instantly escalated to a boiling point. The recent history between the sisters was already fraught with bitter resentment. Brooke had recently unleashed a vicious verbal assault on Katie, officially disowning her and shattering the Logan sisterhood over Katie's decision to poach Hope for the new Logan fashion house. Now, standing in the shadow of Will's catastrophic tragedy, the estranged sisters found themselves locked in a fierce, explosive confrontation. Brooke, unable to separate her corporate loyalties and her allegiance to the Forrester family from the personal tragedy at hand, attempted to offer sympathy that was heavily laced with judgment. She subtly insinuated that Will's reckless behavior and the toxic environment fostered by the Spencer family were to blame for his current predicament. Katie, operating on pure, unadulterated maternal instinct, lashed out with the ferocity of a wounded lioness. She fiercely accused Brooke and the entire Forrester clan of driving Will to the brink of insanity. Katie argued passionately that it was the Forresters' elitist demands, Ridge's hypocritical ultimatums, and Electra's unforgiving rigidity that had systematically stripped Will of his hope and pushed him onto that motorcycle. The hospital waiting room transformed into a vicious battleground as the sisters argued vehemently over who truly cared about Will's future. Brooke defended Electra's right to walk away from a volatile situation, condemning Will's history of physical violence and deception. Katie countered by condemning Brooke's utter lack of empathy and her blind devotion to a family that had always viewed the Spencers as inherently inferior. The argument was a devastating spectacle of broken family bonds. The tragedy of Will's amputation failed entirely to bridge the massive gap between Katie and Brooke. Instead, it highlighted their irreconcilable differences, driving the wedge between them deeper than ever before. They were no longer just arguing about fashion lines, corporate espionage, or family loyalty. They were arguing over the very soul and future of a young man whose life had been irrevocably shattered. Katie vowed to protect her son from any further Forrester influence, while Brooke maintained her rigid stance that the Spencers were the architects of their own destruction. As the chaotic arguments raged in the hallways, Will Spencer lay silently in his hospital bed, hovering in the delicate space between life and death. When he finally begins to wake, he will not only have to face the excruciating phantom pain of his amputated leg, but also the phantom pain of a life and a love that he can never get back. His physical mutilation will forever serve as a grim, daily reminder of the night he lost everything. Melissa Dillon will be there to guide him through the darkness, cementing her role as his savior and solidifying her ultimate victory over Electra. The love story that once held so much promise has now mutated into a dark, haunting tragedy of self-blame, physical agony, and irreversible consequences. The scars left by this horrific accident will not only mark Will's body forever, but they will also leave a permanent, devastating imprint on the legacies of the Spencer, Forrester, and Logan families.